What makes a great fantasy? Is it massive battles, complicated lore, the struggle of good versus evil? Or is it something more human? For decades, J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings has been the undisputed king of fantasy. So when Amazon decided to make Rings of Power, people were really hoping to get to see more of that tale that everyone grew to know and love on screen. But what if the true successor to Tolkien's story didn't come from a blockbuster production? What if it was a quiet, contemplative anime about an elf's journey after the adventure was over? Let me convince you, dear viewer, that Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, is a better and more emotionally resonant Lord of the Rings style story than Rings of Power itself. The weight of immortality and time. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings was known for many elements: courage, duty, respect, honor, integrity, the call to adventure, the call to something greater than ourselves. But what both Tolkien's world and Frieren share is a profound, sorrowful theme: the crushing weight of time. In The Lord of the Rings, we see this through elves like Elrond and Galadriel, who have watched kingdoms rise and fall. They were born and lived since before the sun and the moon even existed. Every day, we look up and take the sun and the moon for granted. But imagine, their early days were lit by the light of the two trees. They view the world at a fundamentally different level. For them, nothing could ever be the same as it once was. And tragically, the lives of their mortal friends, in contrast, were beautiful but short. As a result, the elves tended to carry the burden of civilizations, the burden of time, the burden of literal ages, thousands of years, furrowed in their brows, forever pressed in their memories. Now, the supposed prequel, Rings of Power, should have been able to capture at least some of that, but it fails to capture any of the gravitas or the perspective of the elves of Middle-earth.
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because the stone sees only downward.
That's stupid! Use your common sense!
Instead, taking the more childish tact of having Galadriel be an insufferable know-it-all, seemingly always obsessed with her own side quests, as opposed to what was best for her companions and her kin. Her immortality is merely used as a shallow point that forces the plot forward haphazardly in her relentless hunt, but never is the viewer actually challenged to believe that she could possibly be 2,000 or 3,000 years old. Honestly, she acts more like a petulant teenager more than an elven commander. Frieren, on the other hand, takes the concept of time and its effects on people, namely elves, and makes it the entire emotional core of the story. The anime starts after the Demon Lord has been defeated. For Frieren, the 10-year story is shown through brief flashbacks, little snippets that the viewer gets to understand of her past and her adventures. And often this comes about as a result of Frieren realizing that she was missing or failed to appreciate something that happened. Because as someone that lives for thousands of years, why live in the moment? The moment doesn't really matter that much. In fact, a moment to them is years, decades. It's just time. What's the big deal? But in contrast, her human companions, Eisen, Himmel, and Heiter, this was a large part of their lives, and they cherish every moment of it. And when the hero Himmel dies of old age some 50 years later, Frieren finally realizes that she did care. She does miss him. She's confused that she has grief over his passing. And it's only at his funeral, seeing how much he meant to the world and realizing how little time she really spent getting to know him, that the devastating imbalances of the perspectives between humans and elves really hit her. She comes to cherish the time she spent with those heroes. It becomes the impetus of her life as she seeks to retrace what she lost and to cherish the last bit of memory. In my opinion, this is part of the tragedy that defines Tolkien's elves, but amplified. You see, Frieren isn't about an urgent quest to save the world like the race to Mount Doom. There is no all-seeing eye, no massive armies of orcs looming at humans' doorstep, at least not like in Lord of the Rings. Instead, the ebb and flow of time itself, the advancement of civilizations, is the antagonist. It's the pain of realizing you didn't appreciate the precious, fleeting moments with people that you loved until they were long gone. Rings of Power, in contrast, tries to capture the narrative quest element found in Lord of the Rings, as well as the wisdom and knowledge that time bestowed to the elves. But it kind of failed on both accounts. I think this happened as a result of poor writing, myopic vision, you name it. But Frieren presents to us the loneliness of an immortal elf grappling with her memories. And it doesn't even try to rescue us with nonsensical action scenes or useless asides with Harfoots. Doesn't have to be in the story at all. No, instead it puts us in a moment where you realize something's lost. Some part of her life is gone and can never be experienced again.
なんでもっと知ろうと思わなかったんだろう。
The legacy of a great journey. Most fantasy epics are about the journey itself. The quest to beat the Dark Lord, the forming of a relationship, the big final battle. Lord of the Rings literally is that story. It is the penultimate fantasy story that has spawned thousands of tales the world over. One of the most poignant parts of Lord of the Rings, and one that's often overlooked, is at the very end. What happens to the quiet lives of the hobbits after they return home? What happens to the world after it is saved? The Rings of Power tries to incorporate some of these ideas, but it just fails at all counts at either being an action series or a compelling narrative. And frankly, it ends up just falling into the same failure that a lot of prequels fall into. Everyone already knows the plot. Why am I watching this? There's no sword of Damocles over the viewer's head. We've seen it all. We watched it happen. We know the conclusion. We know exactly what happens when the sword falls. There's no suspense here. There's nothing truly keeping us from knowing what happens in the end. So what's supposed to happen is the series is supposed to create compelling side plots. Or perhaps it should weave in a narrative to illustrate how things got so bad. Perhaps instead of trying to write their own side stories, they could just literally give the viewer what they asked for. Let them see exactly what they always thought happened on screen. That would satisfy the viewer. Give people exactly what they want. In fact, Star Wars comes to mind, the first 3 episodes. How everything was going great for the Jedi until suddenly everything flips on its head at the end in episode 3 as the Republic comes crashing down with the Jedi being assassinated. And then Darth Vader is born, and you know the rest of the story. They managed to both do side plots as well as give viewers exactly what they could have expected. Everything crashing down. But in Rings of Power, a series with considerably more watch time than the first 3 episodes of Star Wars, the journey just feels rushed, escalating from one plot point to the next without any moments of reflection that made Tolkien's work so immersive. Frieren, on the other hand, flips this script entirely. As I said before, the great adventure is over before it really begins. The story, in essence, is just a really long epilogue. Imagine an extra credits scene of your favorite Marvel movie extending for 24 hours, except you actually enjoyed it. Frieren's new quest isn't to save the world. It's to retrace her steps along with the viewer, but this time to better understand the friends that she lost. And frankly, this structure lets the narrative breathe in a way that feels deeply Tolkien-like. Just as Tolkien would pause for songs, poems, and deep lore, time for everyone to sit back, relax, eat together, and discuss the fate of the world. Frieren allows whole episodes to be about finding a specific flower for a memorial, or fulfilling a silly promise she made decades ago. On a personal note, by the way, I often wonder what it would have been like to read a world written by Tolkien of what happened after Lord of the Rings. Not just to follow the characters like Aragorn or Sam, but to really see the progress of the world and to watch it grow in the wake of Sauron's defeat. Now, in one way, we do know what happens, right? The world, the real world we live in, is what comes after. It's implied, even though I don't think it was ever explicitly stated. But it is sad that the story basically ended after Lord of the Rings.
Any chance of seeing that old ring of mine again? Should like to have held it one last time.
Fellowship and Found Family. The Lord of the Rings, and specifically the Fellowship of the Ring, is pretty iconic. It illustrates the found family trope that's in a lot of fantasies, where you have a group from different races and backgrounds all come together, united by a common goal, and bonded together through shared hardship. Frieren understands this in a way that Rings of Power just can't. Her original friendship with Himmel, Heiter, and Eisen, they're all shown in flashbacks. And in those flashbacks, they're not powerful heroes journeying through the countryside, conquering all evil. No, they're just people. They're friends who bickered, celebrated, and supported each other, helped each other through their failures, and celebrated their successes. They each tried to make a difference in the world, even differences that they didn't even think would have mattered. And the new friendship that Frieren has with Fern and Stark somewhat reflects the old friendship she had with the other 3 heroes. And watching those 2 young apprentices grow allows us to hazily see the past replay itself through their experiences. I think it's a kind of amusing, actually. Frieren plays multiple roles throughout the series. In some ways, she takes the role of Gandalf in guiding Fern and Stark. She's ancient and incredibly powerful. But unlike Gandalf, who is often mysterious and purposefully inscrutable, in contrast, she is socially awkward, standoffish, and kind of aloof whenever situations aren't really important. I mean, Why does it matter if you sleep in till noon? You live forever anyway, what's the rush? But the way it's written, it brings an amount of humanity, even to an elf, who supposedly is too far above all of us. But it's trying to illustrate, no, she's still a person too. And she's trying to come to grips with what she lost, just like we might. And by taking the time to teach her young moral companions, she learns from them. She learns what it means to be human. She takes her time, learns to be patient, to empathize, and to value the current moment, instead of just letting it drift by. In short, Frieren is both the mentor and the viewer, depending on the moment, somehow being a relatable character in a very grounded yet unexpected way. This is something that Rings of Power could have done. It could have taken the ideas from Tolkien and actually expounded on them, and either shown them in new ways or shown them in even expected ways, but they failed to do either. They could have made a real family of companions for Galadriel, echoing the fellowship that was in the Lord of the Rings novels. Instead, they just have our evolving dwarf characters, and I use that term loosely, because the characters in the series really just serve as pieces of narrative convenience and less as actual living people. And as a result, there's no family, no earned growth, and as I stated earlier, its central protagonist, Galadriel, is often portrayed so abrasively and so single-mindedly that her relationships just feel secondary to her personal quest for revenge. Like, she's supposed to be a commander. Never do I remember her caring about the people that are under her. No genuine concern was given for her troops, only that they should follow her to divert something that's happening in the future. Whoop-de-doo. She lectures, she commands, but she honestly rarely shows the vulnerability that makes a relationship so compelling. And as a commander, she doesn't even show the gravitas needed for anyone to even want to follow her in the first place. She's just a Mary Sue in a suit. She's a Mary Suit.
It wasn't that funny.
She lacks all the warmth and vision that later Galadriel has, and that makes her really difficult to connect with. Now, I don't expect her to be literally Galadriel from the Fellowship of the Ring, but I do expect her to be slightly responsible. She's like 2,000 or 3,000 years old. They could have done so much better. And I'm not even getting into all the love interest nonsense. Emotional resonance and moral clarity. Lastly, The Lord of the Rings had world-altering stakes, but it never really lost sight of the small human moments. I mean, that was the entire purpose of the Hobbits existing, to help ground us in a story, to show normal people and how they react. Sam's loyalty, Merry and Pippin's friendship, or Aragorn's self-doubt. Those are all things that are elements that make them human, that allow the viewer to relate to them. The Rings of Power tries to lean hard into the epic scale of Lord of the Rings, and it forgets all the purpose that made Lord of the Rings relevant. And it's that lack of vision, that lack of character depth, that lack of a reasonable cast or a reasonable number of extras, and a layer of flagrant inconsistencies that just makes Rings of Power more of a chore to get through than anything. Now, I'm trying not to make this a Rings of Power review, trust me. That will require me to rewatch it, which I refuse to do. Not unless this video gets over 1 million views or something, which, let's be real. But the reality is, Rings of Power is too weak of a narrative to even be considered in the Tolkien universe. I could have gotten better stories from Tumblr fanfiction than Rings of Power. I mean, Rings of Power was a Tumblr fanfiction. Frieren, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It has the elements that Rings of Power should have had. It doesn't try to chase all the epic moments, it just lets them happen organically. In fact, many of the epic moments are intimate flashbacks, or brief battle, or application of some new technique. As I said earlier, an entire episode might be Frieren looking for some flower or a grimoire with a useless spell, only for us to find out the spell was important to one of her dead friends. The story makes the case that these small moments of connection and memory are more meaningful than any great battle, and when there are battles, they are earned through the development of characters and the patience with enjoying every moment. In terms of moral clarity, Frieren feels incredibly Tolkien-esque, because for whatever reason, the past several decades, we've just been cursed with the modern fantasy that just adores a morally gray villain. Rings of Power constantly plays with this idea, because clearly the writers never picked up a Tolkien book in their lives. But Frieren presents his antagonists, the demons, as forces of absolute, unredeemable evil. Demons are terrifying not just because they're powerful, but because they're intelligent predators who perfectly mimic speech and emotion just to deceive and kill humans. Some of them get really advanced and talk about peace and love, but they don't really understand the concept innately. They're just tools they use to hunt humans. Yeah, they're pretty obsessed with that. There's no reasoning with them, there's no finding common ground, they're fundamentally incompatible with humanity. This makes a clear line between good and evil, a lot like the conflict with Sauron and Morgoth. And honestly, it actually raises the stakes. Instead of trying to figure out why a villain is bad, they're bad, they're going to kill you. There's your stakes. It makes human life feel far more fragile, and it takes the connections. It makes them far more precious, because you can lose them at any time to an absolutely brutal force of nature. In Frieren, there is no complex political squabble. No, there's good and there's evil. In my opinion, this harkens to lessons we need to understand in the real world, and lessons that we've just forgotten or thrown away as a culture. Evil is evil. Now, I know that sounds simple in concept, but as I said, modern stories love their gray villains. The misunderstood villain that was just mistreated when they were young. We're supposed to sympathize with them at some level. There's a reason they turned out bad. And certainly, characters like that do exist in real life. But the side effect of a culture that only produces morally gray villains, or villains that are somehow misunderstood, is that people grow up, generations grow up, forgetting, not even knowing what abject evil looks like. This was the purpose of stories and tales for almost all of human history. They were to remind us, in narrative form, of the types of villains and the types of unrepentant evil that exist. They're supposed to teach us about the Faustian Boggans, the people who would sell their soul to the devil for riches, and the King Arthurs, those who see duty thrust upon them, reach out and grab it, and fulfill their duty to their land, their family, and their country. They're supposed to preserve those lessons and present them in the format that the young and old can understand, enjoy, and grow from. Rings of Power fails to do any of this, but hopefully you'd agree with me. Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, is as close to a Tolkien story as we could possibly get in a modern era. What do you think? I haven't done a media analysis in a long time. You can probably tell because I was rather rusty. But give me your thoughts. Have you seen Frieren? Have you seen Rings of Power? Do you think Rings of Power was an honorable successor or prequel to Lord of the Rings? Or do you think, as I do, that they don't even belong in the same sentence? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!